Hey, what's going on, wrestling fans? It is yours truly, TJ Jones, and welcome to another edition of the TJ Knows Wrestling Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. And on this edition, we're going to be talking about the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. I'm talking about the jabroni beating, pie eating, trailblazing, eyebrow raising. We're talking about The Rock. Okay, that is who we're going to be talking about here. This man, pretty much, his name speaks for itself. I mean, this guy has done it all. He has transcended the world of professional wrestling, no doubt about it. But I mean, all of the achievements that The Rock has had over the course of his entire career, I mean, it all started with the WWE, right? I mean, this guy's the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He just launched his own television show on NBC, which I checked out. It was pretty doggone good, man. Young Rock, check it out on NBC. But how did The Rock get started, man? Like, how did The Rock go from, how did he get to this point? Well, I guess we got to just go ahead and take a look at The Rock and some of the things that he's done throughout his career. First off, he was born Dwayne Douglas Johnson. He was born on May 2nd of 1972 in Hayward, California. And we all know that The Rock, his father was Soul Man Rocky Johnson, a professional wrestler. His grandfather was the High Chief Peter Maivia. And so The Rock was the first third-generation wrestler in history of professional wrestling, man. And The Rock has done it all, man. I'm looking on here, looking at all his achievements, man, all his championships that he's won throughout his entire career. We know that he's a multi-time WWE champion. I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, a 7-time world champion. He's a tag team champion. I'm pulling it up right now. Let's see, The Rock. He was a 2-time WCW champion. He was a 8-time WWE champion, a WWF Intercontinental champion on 2 different occasions. He was a 5-time tag team champion. He was the winner of the 2000 Royal Rumble. He was the 6th Triple Crown champion. He was the Deadly Game WWF champion tournament winner, which we'll talk about a little bit later. He's won 9 Slammy Awards. Okay, so The Rock has done it all. He's done it all. But The Rock didn't always start off on a high note, okay? I mean, look, we all know that he was a third-generation superstar. He signed with the WWF at the time. And, man, Vince McMahon fell in love with him. I mean, he just absolutely loved The Rock, man. I mean, he seen money all over him. So did Jim Ross. Jim Ross was the one that discovered him. From what I found out, that The Rock father, Rocky Johnson, did not want The Rock to be a professional wrestler. I mean, The Rock, we know he played football in college and he went up to the Canadian League and, things didn't work out. He wanted to try in wrestling. His father did not want him to get in wrestling because his father was very upset about how wrestling treated him. Soul Man Rocky Johnson, along with Tony Atlas, they were the first African Americans to be dubbed the tag team champions back in the day. But Soul Man Rocky Johnson just had such a hard time in professional wrestling, and he didn't want that for his son. But The Rock's mother convinced The Rock's father to give him an opportunity. They got in touch with Jim Ross, and Dr. Tom Pritchard who was the person who trained The Rock. You probably know his brother, Bruce Pritchard, who played Brother Love. But Dr. Tom Pritchard trained The Rock along with Pat Patterson, the late, great Pat Patterson. And man, he was off and running, man. It started back in 1997. The Rock made his debut on an episode of Monday Night Raw, and he got to win. And he also was a part of the Survivor Series team. And he came out there, man. He was they gave him the name Rocky Maivia. It was a combination of his dad's name, Soul Man Rocky Johnson, and his grandfather, the High Chief Peter Maivia. He comes out there with one of the worst outfits I've ever seen in my entire life. It looked like he had like a jester neck on or something like that around his neck, and had an ugly haircut, man. Had this little Jerry curl that was dripping down the sides, and he come out there with the white boots on and the blue tights, and just out there smiling and happy. And I can just remember Jim Ross saying, "That's going to be the man right there. That's the blue chipper." And they started to name him. They dubbed him the blue chipper. And The Rock was the sole survivor in the Survivor Series match in his debut pay-per-view match in 1997. And then in February of a couple months later, he ended up winning an Intercontinental Championship for the first time versus Triple H. So, I mean, they put the jetpack on The Rock pretty early. But here's the thing, man. This is something that we learned about wrestling. And I don't understand like why Vince does this, but whatever. Look, fans can see these guys coming a mile away. They can see it, man. They can see the guy that you're trying to push to the moon and you're trying to force to be the guy. So The Rock got a lot of backlash, man. People were booing The Rock. They were saying, "Die, Rocky, die." They were saying, "Rocky sucks." They were saying all these different things about The Rock. And The Rock was like really discouraged, man. He went to the back. He was talking to Vince. He was like, "Man, why would I do to these folks? I thought I was a good guy. I thought they would like me." But fate has it, The Rock ended up getting hurt. I think he ended up having a knee injury, and he was out for a couple months. So Jim Cornette was the guy who went to Vince and convinced Vince McMahon to turn Rock into a bad guy. So Jim Cornette got on the phone, got with The Rock, asked him, "How would you feel about being a bad guy?" And The Rock said, "I would love it." So on the episode of Monday Night Raw, when Farouk was taking on an opponent, The Rock gets in the ring and interferes with the match, gives the opponent, which the first time we ever seen the rock bottom, and he stands in the middle of the ring and he puts his fists up in unison with Farouk, and he joins the Nation of Domination. And this is when The Rock's career started to take off. He wasn't being called Rocky Maivia anymore. He just went by simply as The Rock. And he was alongside Farouk, Kama Mustafa, Mark Henry, and D'Lo Brown. And, he got his start, man. He was able to have some classic matches alongside his brothers in arms, the Nation of Domination. They were going and having feuds with D-Generation X with a young, emerging Triple H leading the helm, along with China, X-Pac, and the New Age Outlaws. And those guys had some classic matches, man. They had a really good ladder match, and they helped each other, man. They went back and forth, and they helped build each other's career. And The Rock ended up winning the Intercontinental Championship yet again. And this time it was a little bit different because The Rock, he started to feel himself. He started to believe in himself because it was him turned up to about 1,000. And, he started to have these promos when he started to refer to himself in the third person, saying The Rock says this, The Rock says that, and, start using little catchphrases like "know your role" and "shut your mouth," and start calling people jabronis and stuff like that. And the crowd just ate it up, man. They just fell in love with him. And at one time, the crowd wanted to boo him. Now, everybody wanted to cheer him. And, of course, Vince McMahon kind of saw this coming. You know what I'm saying? He saw it, and he had a pulse on it, and he decided to make a little bit of a change. He decided to take The Rock and make The Rock the leader of the Nation of Domination. The Rock ended up feuding with Farouk. Farouk, ended up like looking at The Rock, saying that he was trying to take over, and of course that was The Rock's intentions. And The Rock ended up being the leader of the nation, and he started having these classic matches with Stone Cold Steve Austin. And where they were battling for the Intercontinental Championship. Stone Cold Steve Austin was mostly getting the upper hand because at this particular time, Stone Cold Steve Austin was starting to rise up the ranks as being the guy. So, but The Rock was right there, man. Stone Cold Steve Austin talked about this on several occasions when he did shoot interviews talking about The Rock and saying that, he's seen The Rock kind of nipping at his heels, and it depends on who you ask. A lot of people would say that Stone Cold Steve Austin was 1 and The Rock was 1A. Those guys were like right there. That was something that you didn't see. normally you would see this undisputed top guy in an organization, right? in WWE or WWF at the time, it was Hulk Hogan, right? Then after Hulk Hogan, it was Bret the Hitman Hart, then Shawn Michaels, and then it was Stone Cold Steve Austin. And then you had The Rock right there with him. So that was something that was unheard of. But I mean, Stone Cold back in 1998, he won at WrestleMania 14. He became the WWF champion, but The Rock was still, battling people like Ken Shamrock, the Intercontinental Championship. But he was slowly starting to, build the brand, and people just start, seeing him coming. So they had a tournament, for the WWF Championship, right? And at this time, Vince McMahon, who was the villain, he had a stooge on it, a part of his staff called Mankind. Mankind was the stooge for Vince McMahon. He was part of the corporation. And they had this Deadly Games tournament to decide who was going to face Mankind for the WWF Championship. So at this time, The Rock was red hot. He removed himself from the nation. He was on his own. He was doing his own thing. He comes out. People were cheering because at this time, like I said, people were loving The Rock. And he ends up facing Mankind and what wrestling like to call a double turn, right? The Rock came into the match as the good guy, but he left as the bad guy. And Mankind, who came in there as the bad guy because he was with Vince McMahon, left as a good guy because The Rock ended up joining forces with Vince McMahon in the corporation, and he ended up winning his first ever WWF championship from Mankind. So you had The Rock, who was the head of the corporation. The Rock came out the very next night after the pay-per-view. He cut this scathing promo saying that you think I forgot about y'all telling me to die, Rocky, die. You remember when you guys were booing me out of the building? Well, I didn't forget about that. So I am the leader of the corporation. So he started to roll with Vince McMahon and the corporation. He was feuding with Mankind. So The Rock and Mankind, man, they had these brutal matches because here's the thing. The thing about The Rock was, I mean, you seen this charismatic, good-looking guy, you know what I'm saying, with these Versace shirts, but nobody really seen this mean streak in The Rock. So you have a guy like Mankind who was known as the hardcore legend that can push guys to the brink. You had a guy like that to be able to show that The Rock actually had a mean streak. And we all know about the classic match, the I Quit match, The Rock versus Mankind. I mean, it was just straight up brutal stuff. We all can just remember that moment when The Rock handcuffed Mankind and he just gave him these vicious chair shots. And if you remember, they had a documentary that followed Mankind, and you can just remember Mankind's family being in the crowd, and the match just got so bad that, I mean, his children were crying, and Mankind's wife had to rush the kids to the back, and I mean, but it showed a different side of The Rock that people didn't see. They didn't see this part of The Rock. They never seen this Rock before ever. So Rock was really legitimized that night thanks to Mankind. And, afterwards, they had these different matches, but a few months later, him and Mankind started to become real close friends, right? They started to have these funny segments. We all know about the classic "This Is Your Life" segment. That's still to this day the highest rated segment in Monday Night Raw history, when Mankind brought out all these different people and The Rock was just out there just going off on them and just the classic stuff, man. And together, him and The Rock, who were the odd couple, they became the Rock and Sock Connection, and they won the tag team championships together. So that was another moment in Rock's history that we as fans won't forget. But then, The Rock, he won, multiple championships. You know about the WWF invasion. The Rock was actually carrying a torch during the time when Stone Cold Steve Austin was having issues with management. He was the one that was at the forefront on this whole invasion situation. He beat Booker T for the World Heavyweight Championship. And, The Rock ended up getting the opportunity to be a guest on Saturday Night Live. And this was one of those moments, man, where, the light came on. The Rock did such a good job on Saturday Night Live. People started to look at him. I mean, Hollywood started to pay attention to The Rock. Like, oh man, this guy, he has comedic chops. He's extremely good looking. The camera loves him, and he's charismatic. So you start to see The Rock like doing different commercials. You start seeing him in different music videos. There was a song by Wyclef Jean called "It Doesn't Matter." He was the focal point in that video. He had a little spot in The Mummy where he actually played the Scorpion King, and he did a really good job in that. And then all of a sudden, around 2002, 2003, you had The Rock having his very first movie, man, where he was the star, the Scorpion King. And this one we seen The Rock started to really, we started to see the writing on the wall here. We knew that The Rock was making us laugh. We knew about the comedy chops he had. We know about all the things he said, cutting these promos, embarrassing his opponents. Always had the gift of gab. Now we see him in Hollywood. He's doing these different things, and these movies are really successful. And we start to see him slowly start to make movies, and his, the workload started to deteriorate in WWE. He'll come back 5-6 months, and like I said, you just realized that The Rock, had another calling, and that was Hollywood. Start seeing him in movies like The Rundown, right? Start seeing him in movies like Walking Tall, Gridiron Games, and next thing you know, for 7 years, we didn't see The Rock. The Rock didn't show up until in 2004. We seen him at, we seen him at WrestleMania, right? We seen him at WrestleMania 20. Then after that, he left for, like I said, left for about 7 years. And we didn't see him. We seen The Rock start to kind of, disassociate, and try to separate himself from WWE at the time. He wasn't going by The Rock anymore. He used to be in the movies, he used to be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or just simply The Rock. But then he just scratched the whole The Rock thing altogether and just became Dwayne Johnson, because he said that his agent and his representation at the time felt like he just needed to separate himself from being that pro wrestler, because it opened up doors for him. In ways I understand, in ways I don't, because how can you really just look at Dwayne Johnson and don't just see The Rock? Okay, I mean, The Rock made Dwayne Johnson who he is. I mean, that's just a fact. But anyway, 7 years later, The Rock ends up showing up back, on television. This time we see him going back and forth with John Cena. He comes back, John Cena calls him out. Him and John Cena have these very personal promos. I mean, they were basically shooting out there. I don't think a lot of people understood that. But John Cena and The Rock did not like each other because at this time, John Cena said he didn't respect The Rock because he felt like The Rock could have came around, could have showed his face every now and then, but he just straight flat out left, which you think about it now is pretty hypocritical, but I digress. But anyway, John Cena didn't like the fact that The Rock, didn't come around. And The Rock said that he was out there trying to build a platform for people like John Cena, who might want to have a career outside of wrestling when it's all said and done. And these guys, went to WrestleMania, they fought, and the match itself was, it was all right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was more hype than anything. It was more hype. I felt like it could have been a better match. I heard that The Rock ended up hurting his shoulder, after the match. No, not that was the second time. Excuse me. He didn't end up hurting himself, but they ended up having a match. The Rock ended up beating John Cena in the ring 1, 2, 3. So the very next night, they both meet in the middle of the ring, and they say that they were going to have a rematch. They were going to have a rematch at WrestleMania the following year. And this was the first time ever we ever seen like a match be booked that far out. Okay. Well, they end up having, another match, but The Rock ended up coming back a little bit early. He ended up coming back a little bit early to take on CM Punk. And this was during the time when CM Punk was red hot. I mean, this guy was hot. You know what I'm saying? Hotter than fish grease, okay? And he was aligned with Paul Heyman at the time. And The Rock faced him at the Royal Rumble. The Rock beat CM Punk for the WWE Championship. At the time, The Rock actually ended up changing the Spinner Championship that was held since John Cena had it back in 2005. And The Rock changed it to a more conventional title than what we see today. And it was going by the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. And, you know, The Rock carried it to WrestleMania. He ended up dropping the title to John Cena. And, you know, that's when The Rock got hurt. And we didn't see The Rock anymore, you know, for a while after that. Okay. I don't think he wrestled anymore, you know, I don't think in a full match after that, if I'm not mistaken. But long story short, man, you look at The Rock's career. I kind of summed it up as quickly as I can. But when you look at The Rock's career, you see a guy who was loaded with talent, loaded with charisma. He will go down in history as the greatest superstar in WWF history, or one of them. You can make an argument to say that he's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of WWF performers. Do I feel like he was the best wrestler in the world? Absolutely not. You know, I think he had a limited move set, but he was extremely electrifying. I mean, he was extremely charismatic. You know, one moment or one era that I really liked about The Rock when he came back, after he came back from Hollywood, when he was known as Hollywood Rock, and he was out there dressed up in the leather, you know what I'm saying? He had the leather vest on and them leather pants, kept on coming out there. You know, he was a bad guy. He was coming back. He was, you know, so Hollywood. He didn't care about the fans anymore and all that. And, you know, like when he faced Goldberg, you know, at Backlash one year, that was funny, you know what I'm saying, to see him come back. I mean, there was a lot of things that I skipped, you know. I mean, there were some great moments. Of course, the match that he had with Hulk Hogan, you know, at WrestleMania, that was a great moment in itself. But I think the Hollywood Rock was probably the best version of The Rock that I love. But The Rock is definitely one of the all-time greats. He's definitely going to be in the WWE Hall of Fame one day. I just think that they're waiting for the right time. He's transcended wrestling, man. Like, this is a guy, normally you see guys who, you know, would be wrestlers, you know, that turn actors. Some people forget that this guy's he's even had a wrestling career. But The Rock definitely was the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. And now he's the most electrifying man in Hollywood. So that's the story of The Rock, man. Gotta love The Rock. He is definitely one of the all-time greats. So I'll read some of your comments, then we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. And let me see what you all think about The Rock. Damien says, good morning, OG. I caught the SOTS late, too, for working the graveyard shift. Damien, thank you so much, man, for checking out the TJ Knows Wrestling podcast. And thank you so much for checking out the State of the Saints podcast as well, man. Thank you. I like when Warren Sapp tells the story about him and The Rock at the Miami Hurricanes. Yeah, The Rock, you know, played for the University of Miami. I think Warren Sapp is the person that gave him the nickname Dewey. So The Rock is definitely in my top 5 wrestlers of all time. I think a lot of people would say that. I think a lot of people would put The Rock up there, you know. The Rock was one of the catalysts, man, for the Attitude Era. He was one of the guys that helped WWF win the Monday Night War. You know, I don't think they would have won without The Rock. The Rock was one of the main reasons why people was, you know, staying and clicking and watching Monday Night Raw a little bit longer, you know, when he was on the screen. So he definitely deserves his respect in that regard. But I want to say thank you all for checking out the TJ Knows Wrestling podcast. Thank you so much. I would love to hear what you all have to say about The Rock. Like and share this video. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. YouTube.com, search TJ Knows Wrestling. Really do appreciate it. We'll have a show on this Friday. The focus will be the 1 to The Rock's 1A, Stone Cold Steve Austin. We'll be talking about Stone Cold Steve Austin and his rise to prominence. So This Friday, the focus is going to be on what a lot of people consider the greatest WWF superstar of all time, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Till next time, I'll see you down the road.